What are the pros and cons of starting a job while pregnant? I will never forget, back in the day, one of my best friends was about 4 months pregnant, and she'd been at her company for like 6 years, and she said, I'm applying for this new role now at this new company. And I remember telling her, I don't think that's a good idea. She said, nope, I'm so bored. I'm not motivated. I need something that is exciting and different. And I remember thinking, this is a bad decision. And honestly, I was completely wrong. I'm curious if you have a different perspective on that.
I have started a new job when pregnant, and I feel like it kind of depends on what the job is. So in my last position, I was an individual contributor. I was doing one part of marketing. I was then promoted to take on a leadership role, managing the whole corporate marketing team. And I think the pro was I got to wind down the work I was doing as the individual and focus more on, in the few months leading up to my leave, getting to know my team, figuring out what their roles will be. The con was I then had to pass them back to their previous manager. So it was a little bit, I think the struggle wasn't so much for me as an employee getting a new role as much as it was of like, how do I manage other people through this experience because of the type of role that I was taking on.
So we are here today to talk about starting a new job while expecting a child. And part of the reason why I wanted to talk about this topic, why I wanted to bring Jenna on to talk about this topic is we are very loud on LinkedIn, and we talk a lot about all these different facets of parental leave. And what we've noticed is more recently, we've had a lot of people reach out to us to ask us for our advice on looking for a new job while pregnant or expecting a child. Now, whether that's taking an opportunity internally within a company while you're expecting a child, or if it's actually interviewing while pregnant or expecting, this is such a hot topic. It's something that people are constantly asking us for. And when you dig a little bit deeper, it is actually quite nuanced. And so our goal today is to walk through all of the things that we've learned and seen across our conversations with people we work with, people who see our content on LinkedIn, reach out, have calls with us, as well as share some of our personal experience, because Jenna and I both have a little bit of personal experience when it comes to starting new roles, new jobs while pregnant. So let's dive into things. I'm going to start with probably the number one question we get all the time, which is, when should I disclose that I'm pregnant? We get asked this constantly. So for people who are job searching while pregnant, when do they need to disclose? Do they need to disclose in the interview process? Do they disclose after they get an offer? I'm going to put you on the spot, Jenna, and get your opinion.
Okay. So yes, this is probably, of all the questions I've ever received on LinkedIn, especially when we were sharing our tenure database of, companies with better policies around when you're actually eligible for parental leave, is like, do I talk about it now or do I wait until the end? My personal opinion is, I guess it kind of depends on how far along you are, but I personally don't think I would disclose until I got an offer, and then I would talk through it once I knew, like, yes, I have an offer in hand, and then, getting into the logistics, I guess, of what it means. If I were 8 or 9 months pregnant, I might change that answer where I would want to disclose it sooner, solely because I would be onboarding for maybe a week, 2 weeks, and then I'd have to go out. So I think it depends on how far along you are, but also how comfortable, I guess, you are in the interview process.
Yeah, I think I broadly agree with you. The only additional thing I would add in to make this overly complicated is I think it depends on how much power you have as an applicant. And so I've known certain people in my life that have disclosed their pregnancy very early, like 6 weeks. They just found out that they're pregnant, and they tell in the beginning of an interview process. And what I've noticed thematically is that those are the women who are really feeling like they do not need the job and that they have more power. They're overqualified for the role. That is sort of the consistent theme that I've seen. And I think the reason that they disclose is because it has something to do, like they're trying to get something out of it. So either they need to negotiate parental leave, or they don't want to take the job, or they want to flag that, hey, you're bringing me in to do this big thing, but I'm actually going to be out, and they've just decided that for their personal comfort, they want to talk about it. That's the only additional thing. I tend to recommend that people don't disclose because I think it's none of their business. And I think most people don't have a ton of power in that negotiation process. And so I agree with you. However, I interviewed while 8 months pregnant once, and I did tell them very early on for the reason you just described, because it's awkward if you get a job and they have all these big plans and then you're like, actually, I'm only going to work for a month and then I'm going to be out. So I just decided I was going to tell them. And quite frankly, I didn't need the job. And so there is a position of privilege there as well.
Right. Yeah, I think especially the messages that we're getting with all the layoffs that have been going on, everyone is more worried saying, oh, I'm 6 months pregnant. How do I get a job now? Because I don't want to wait until I get back. And you're like, what is the right thing to do? And I feel like what you're saying is, and what I agree with is like, you have to do what's best for you, because at the end of the day, if you need the job, you need the job. And, it changes the way you're feeling in the process as well. I feel like there was one really fun story of someone who got a new job at 20 or 24 weeks pregnant. And they were like, I didn't tell my manager. How do I tell them now? And so that was just a really kind of an uplifting story, because she was so nervous to say, by the way, I'm pregnant. And then the situation with her employer was, that's great. Let's get going. Let's figure out how to plan. So I often think, why are we worried about disclosing, especially women are disclosing that they're pregnant, but then it's also that, it's that fear and that guilt of how it's going to be received. So the more we hear these stories of uplifting and good responses, will probably make it a lot easier to be able to disclose it sooner if you want to.
Yeah, I do empathize though with how tough it is, because we know that if a manager is hiring someone, they need that worker. And so I do empathize with how difficult that is for everyone to say, okay, well, we know you need this work done, but I'm also going to need this time off. And so it's a really tough position to be in. And I think when people say, I don't want to disclose, but I feel like I should, they feel like they should because they don't want to get the offer, tell them, and then the manager's upset, and now they have to live in a situation where the manager is upset. Mm-hmm. And so it's complicated, I think, in my mind, because ultimately we all want to end up in a place where we feel supported, and the manager is so critical to your experience. And so if they're going to be upset, whether they find out sooner or later, you probably don't want to work there. And so that's what becomes tricky for me. It's like, okay, if you wait and you disclose after you get the job offer and they're upset, I don't know. It's kind of hard. You want to end up in a place where your manager is happy, and whether you disclose that early or late shouldn't matter. And so it's such a tricky thing to wrap your mind around.
Yeah, I know. It makes me want to change my first answer just talking about it, because the relationship that you have with the hiring manager is very, very, very important to your career. And the whole purpose of interviewing is because you care about your career, and so you don't want to pause because you're having a baby or a child. That's hard.
So I guess let's go into this next question, which is, what are the pros and cons of starting a job while pregnant? And I have some perspectives here. So I will never forget, back in the day, one of my best friends was about 4 months pregnant, and she'd been at her company for 6 years. And she said, I'm applying for this new role now at this new company. And I remember telling her, I don't think that's a good idea. She didn't have any children. I had a child at the time. And I said, this is such a difficult period when you become a parent with the first child that you welcome. I told her, I think it would be better for you to stay in this comfortable position. And she said, nope, I'm so bored. I'm not motivated. I need something that is exciting and different. And I remember thinking, this is a bad decision. And honestly, I was completely wrong. And I've completely changed my perspective since then, because what she expressed, I think, is so true, which is there is a pro of sticking with a job that feels comfortable, which is, it could be easy, and you know that you're going to do well. And so that's a confidence boost. And so when all these things are up in the air and this is a new experience for you, that can be really good. The con of that is if you're going to not feel motivated, it can be the worst feeling to have to go back to a job that you don't feel really good in when you've got a new child at home. Yeah, I'm curious if you have a different perspective on that.
Yeah, so I have started a new job when pregnant, and I feel like it kind of depends on what the job is. So in my last position, I was an individual contributor. I was doing one part of marketing. I was then promoted to take on a leadership role, managing the whole corporate marketing team. And I was 6 or 7 months pregnant. So that was kind of scary, I will say. But when I was first talking through it, I was like, should I, asking myself, like, should I do this? Am I able to do this? And once I said yes, I think the support I had from my manager they knew I was pregnant. They did not have any concerns. It was kind of that helpful boost in a way where if they think I can do it, why should I doubt myself being able to do it? And I think the pro was I got to wind down the work I was doing as the individual and focus more on, in the few months leading up to my leave, getting to know my team, figuring out what their roles will be. The con was I then had to pass them back to their previous manager. So it was a little bit, I think the struggle wasn't so much for me as an employee getting a new role as much as it was of like, how do I manage other people through this experience because of the type of role that I was taking on.
That is an interesting perspective of it's less about you. It's more about what does it do to the team? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think it's also, I've also seen that a lot from people who go through our program who say, oh, it's so difficult to have your manager switch out during, this experience. And I think if you are a manager, even when you think about our Parentaly materials, we put you on a different path if you're a manager, because not only are you planning for yourself, you're also planning for the team that depends on you, and how do you support them through that process? It's a tough situation to be in. From a hiring manager's perspective, the pros and cons are I don't know, very interesting. The pro, I think, of bringing on someone who is expecting, well, I should say in general, we're obviously very biased. And so we have had a lot of people go out, including me, on parental leave. And I think in general, we kind of view parental leaves in our business as these really important, immovable business milestones. So yes, it's a life milestone. But when I found out that our head of growth was expecting, yes, I was thrilled for him on a personal level, but I was also thinking, great, we have this deadline to do all of this important stuff because you're going to be out. And so I think that there are actually a lot of positives from a hiring manager's perspective of you can almost like piece out the work in a clearer, more urgent way. And creating this real sense of urgency can oftentimes be difficult in a business. You can't fake anything like welcoming a child. Like, it's coming. And so you have to get this work done. I think, unfortunately, most hiring managers don't think that way. It is viewed as a negative thing of, oh, instead of getting a person who's going to be here for the next year, I have someone who's going to leave for 6 months. But I really would challenge a lot of managers to think about, one, parental leave goes by in a blink of an eye. Mm-hmm. And so if it is the right person, it doesn't matter. And also, how can it help you accelerate the deliverables? Because we've just seen this over and over again in our own business here, that it's a really helpful prioritization tool.
And do you think it's different? Now I'm asking the questions because I'm curious. You've done both. So hiring someone who is expecting versus having someone on a team changing roles when they're pregnant. Is there anything majorly
Probably. I'm trying to think if I've ever hired someone who is expecting. I don't think I have. Back when I was running the sales team, they tended to be a bit younger, and so I don't think that anyone's joined while they were expecting. And so I've only had the experience of promoting people while they were pregnant or expecting a child. But I mean, I guess this is sort of similar. When I was at my last company, there was a sales rep who was on a different team, and I was starting off my own team, and I had to pick the one person that was going to be our first hire. And it was the most mission critical hire for this team. And the best person by far was a woman who was 7 months pregnant. And this was enterprise sales, so the deals take forever to close. But I didn't even think about not giving her the offer because she was obviously the right person for this role. But I gave her the offer and she was shocked. And she said, "Are you sure you want to do this? Because I'm 7 months pregnant." And I pulled her into a conference room and I said, "Well, I've got a secret for you. Not only are you 7 months pregnant, I'm 12 weeks pregnant." And so we've got a bigger puzzle to figure out here, which is how do we kind of pass the baton between you going on leave and then I'm going on leave? And it was basically the most quote unquote challenging situation because we had a team of 2 of us now, both of us were pregnant. And at the time I pulled her into a conference room because I was secretly pregnant and didn't want other people to know. And she was shocked. And she just said, "I cannot believe that you are picking me to be on this team when I'm 7 months pregnant." And she ended up closing so much in those final 2.5 months that she was at work. And it's the right thing to do. She was the right person. And so I guess I technically hired a new person because she wasn't on my team. It wasn't like I was just promoting her within my own org, but it wasn't like someone coming from the outside. And I knew that she was pregnant and didn't care because we're playing the long game here. But yeah, I think that opened up a different can of worms in that it opened up all these questions around commission plans and whatnot that were more challenging than anything else that we dealt with.
Yeah. That makes sense. I've been on teams where I went out first and then came back to my manager going out a month later and then my other colleague going out early a month after that. And so, yeah, it's really like the logistics of stacking leaves can get tricky. I think like not to totally go on a Parentaly, pitch, but that's why pre-leave planning is so important. And we didn't have Parentaly at this other employer, but we did focus heavily on like, okay, we know this information. We know there are going to be a lot of us out really, really close together. So just, doing that planning ahead of time made it much, much easier to feel comfortable with, knowing that we were all going to be out and just making sure that we were supported, when we got back.
So everything we've talked about has been around pregnancy and largely around a birth parent. Mm-hmm. What about an employee who is expecting a child, but they are not themselves pregnant? So, for example, a father who is expecting, let's say, a child. I think this is an interesting topic because I think oftentimes when we think about looking for a new job while expecting, we're really talking about someone who's pregnant. And I do wonder, how is that experience different or similar for example, a father or a non-birth parent who isn't physically carrying that child, who won't need that medical recovery, who isn't showing. And so they don't go in and people can't see that they are about to expect a child. I think a lot about how that experience is so different and almost unfair, because what I have seen in my world is those non-birth parents, when they start a new job, they will oftentimes not take their leave. And so it creates this really sort of unfair, unequal experience where someone who's pregnant, they really can't, nor would they want to say, well, I'm just not going to take my leave. I mean, they're going through this really major traumatic medical experience. And they just don't say, well, I'm not going to take it. I mean, obviously they are. But then we see the non-birth parents oftentimes say, well, I just started this new job. I couldn't possibly take my leave. And that irks me a little bit, even though I understand from their personal perspective why they do that. I just think it creates this really tough experience for the birthing parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. Yeah, it goes back to the perception, right? So a non-birthing parent or especially I think fathers, they're not even thinking about disclosing that their partner mm-hmm. is expecting because I feel like it is just something they don't think about. So as they're, getting close, because they're not going through the appointments necessarily, they're not going through all the physical changes. So I do wonder, like, is it because it's an afterthought where they're not thinking about it for the interview process? They're just focused on like getting the job, and then they might not even, ask about the policy because it's getting better now, but it hasn't been the norm historically for non-birthing parents to even have as much paid leave. So A, they might not think they get it. B, like you said, they may not feel like it's okay to take it. But yeah, I do wonder if it's kind of a secondary thought, whereas women or birthing parents are constantly thinking like, if I start a new job, will I get leave? Because I have to recover, I have to bond, I have to do all of these, things that when the baby arrives that, yeah, it's just a completely different mindset. And I hate using unfair, but that is like, that's the one
Yeah.
word, because we don't really have the choice if we're carrying to not take leave. Even if it's a shorter leave, you still have to stop, disrupt work, teams, whatever, to physically recover.
Yeah. I think it's also an interesting, something you said stuck with me, which is they don't feel it's okay to take it. And I think that that's probably like nobody questions if a pregnant person is saying, oh, I'm going to have this baby on this date. I have my scheduled C-section. And so I'm starting my parental leave at this date. No one would ever judge that person. But if it's a father, for example, and I actually do think this is very gendered. I think even if it's a woman who is not giving birth herself, there's just this idea of, oh, of course the mother needs to take this time, but the father, it's an optional thing. And so I think even in companies where culturally this is accepted, fathers are still trying to figure out how to get the confidence to take that time, let alone if they're brand new at the company or brand new in their role. I think there is definitely this tendency for non-birth parents, for fathers to say, okay, like I'm going to prioritize work because I can, which is really, it's tough. And also the other thing I would add is there are a lot of companies where you don't qualify for bonding leave until you're at 12 months, but you do qualify for disability leave starting on your day of employment. And so there is also that technicality that for birth parents, maybe they are the only ones that are qualifying for some time away. But it is interesting. And you think about, I think you're exactly right. The real estate in our minds that this takes up when you are pregnant, as opposed to an afterthought. I think that's exactly right.
And companies are offering less leave to men or non-birthing parents, then they, even in the interview process, might not that they won't care, but they might not care as much because it's maybe 4 weeks or 6 weeks compared to birthing, usually getting at least 12 upwards, sometimes 16, 20. We're seeing even 24 as companies are increasing the policy. So yeah.
So I want to ask about your personal experience when you were promoted and navigating sort of the dynamics. All of a sudden, you're now more senior than your peers and having to think about planning for their experience and yours. What do you think was the hardest part about that? Like if you could go back and redo something, what's the one thing you would do differently?
So I'm super type A. I probably focus more on my coverage planning than I did thinking about like, how can I make this a better experience for my team? So I was thinking about like, I still have to do all of these different projects that I was doing in my individual role because I didn't hire a backfill to take on all my like content marketing as an example. But I wasn't necessarily thinking about this, these 3 people on my team were now having to learn how to report to someone new, all the changes that they were going through. In some cases, like you said, I went from peer to manager. So that's emotional for others. And so I wish I focused more on what they needed before diving just straight into like, well, here's all the stuff that all of you have to figure out while I'm out. I did have, specific ideas and suggestions on who should cover what. But yeah, it was harder to figure out what can I do in the next 3 months to make them feel supported and know that just because I'm going out, they don't have to start all over. Because for them, and I had one specific report saying, so you're my new manager, but you're going on leave in 3 months, and then I'm going back to my old manager. Like why they were sort of questioning it. So that was frustrating to me because I'm like, well, I got promoted. What do you? I can't change, that, but we can work together on a way to make it feel more seamless. So I think that was the trickiest part was, yeah.
That's my biggest regret with my first leave that it didn't even cross my mind to think about professional development for my direct reports. It didn't cross my mind to talk to the interim manager about, hey, here's the individual sort of, I don't want to say performance plan, but here are the things that this person does really well. Here's the things that I'm working on helping them improve on. I didn't think of any of that. It was just like, how do we keep, the boat afloat basically and not sink while I'm out? And that's not the right way to handle that experience. And you're right. I was so thinking about me, my deliverables, that I totally missed how this also impacted every other person on my team. I think about it all the time of how different it could be if I could go back and actually put together plans for them and think about making this a really positive experience for them, which kind of leads me to my last question here. We see this all the time with Parentaly, that it can be an incredible opportunity to transition jobs through this parental leave experience. So wind down, and this is kind of shifting a little bit. We've talked in this conversation about getting promoted or starting a new job while pregnant, but what if you move that, sort of change the goalpost a little bit and say, okay, I'm going to wind down my role, go on parental leave, and come back to a new role. I want to spend just a few minutes talking about that, because we have seen, I would say this is the most successful thing that we have seen across the thousands of people who go through our program, when they focus on switching roles internally within their own company. And that's sort of the moment of change, is when they take parental leave. We've seen phenomenal feedback. I want to talk a little bit more about that and why we think that is. My personal opinion on that is, if you're having to wind down all of these things and figure out a coverage plan, it is the best time to figure out, do you want to actually pick it back up? But it's challenging to think about, okay, do you come back to a better version of your current role, or do you actually switch roles and come back into something new? When you were looking at this new or promotion, did you think about that? Think of like, well, maybe I should just wait until I come back to start this? And if yes, why take on that new promotion while you were pregnant?
Yeah, so I don't think I thought about it in that way. I had talked earlier, so I knew the promotion was coming, or that it was an option. I had talked to my manager before I told her I was pregnant. She had said, I'm thinking about changing the setup of the team or the structure of the team. And so she first even asked, like, are you interested in this type of role? So when I had interviewed, and this, like, probably oversharing, but when I had interviewed, I had said, I want to manage people. That's what I did in my last role. I enjoy like mentoring, helping other people excel. So I know this is an IC role, but if there's ever opportunity, I would like that. I was thinking it would be more of like owning PR and content. And so then when she came to me saying, I actually want it to be this bigger role, then I was like, oh, this is so exciting. This is great. Yes, I'll do it. Then fast forward, it finally, it needed board approval. It was a whole process. Then I had to also say, that I was pregnant. And so it was a little different, where I knew it was coming. I had already expressed interest in it. So my bigger, I did have the conversation with my manager of like, is this still the right time? And she was kind of like, you brought this on yourself. You said you wanted it. Like, you're capable, you can do it. And so I think, again, having that like confidence booster of, if leadership thinks that I can do it, like, why would I say I can't? But I did spend some of the time winding down my like IC role. So I thought more about like, what can I do for how can I use contractors to take some of that day-to-day work off so I can be more strategic in the new role. And so it did feel like those 3 months going from the moment I got promoted to when I went out, I focused a lot on winding my role down kind of subconsciously, because I knew I didn't have capacity to do both.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And I think we've done this a few times at Parentaly, where I personally wound down a lot of stuff. I transitioned a lot, came back to a different type of a role with my last leave. With Rich, we've done a lot of talking around, okay, how do we have him come back and actually launch totally new projects when his role will shift pretty significantly. And you look at Alex, she came back and did a totally new role that was more aligned with what she actually wanted to be doing. And that time away allowed her to think through it. And we had planned for it. And so I think that the reason why I bring that up is, I think there's this sort of knee-jerk reaction of, oh, no, job protected leave. You get your same job back when you come back. Like, that's the holy grail. You want to get your job back. Well, guess what? For most people, that's not true. They want to grow in their career, or they want to do things differently. And so instead of us sort of, I don't know, succumbing to this idea of, oh, steady state, they're going to return to the same thing because that's what they should be doing, I think we should challenge that and say, no, actually, what would the best version of you and your job look like? Because for most of us, we're not living that best version of our role right now. And this is our opportunity to do that, because now I'm never going to take a parental leave again. There will never be this moment where I will wind down my work and have the opportunity to reinvent myself. But for people who take parental leave, they have that moment.
Yeah.
They're fortunate.
Yeah. And I can +1 that, because it felt like, again, if I were even questioning my abilities, or if I could actually take it on, like becoming a mom of 2 instead of like going from 1 child to 2 kids. But it was kind of like, why wouldn't I? I'm not going to stall for the next, at that point I had 6 months of leave. So I'm like, do I really want to wait when this is something I've been working hard for years? I came to this organization knowing there would be growth opportunities. And so it almost felt like I can't say no. Even if I don't think I could take it on, why would I say no? I know that I can. This is what I've been working for. And so I liked that I got to do it before, because as you said, I got to wind down work and then I was gone. And so when I got back, it was almost like all those little things, or like the blog posts I was writing, or all these like smaller tactical things, I didn't have to pick them back up because they were either, outsourced while I was out, or just paused. And then we were like, actually wasn't helping, the business very much. So I did have the opportunity, even if I didn't realize it, to wind everything down and then start fresh with the new role, even though I was in that role for a few months before going out.
Yeah, totally. Well, I guess to end this, one thing, I'm going to put you on the spot because I know that both of us struggle with how to answer this question. One thing that managers can do when they have someone who is starting a new role while also expecting a child, if you had to tell them one thing, one piece of advice, what would it be?
How can managers best support someone onboarding and coverage planning? I think just communicate like openly and often. So there's no like one size fits all approach to onboarding. Things change, especially in, different environments. Things move really fast. So if you just proactively communicate regularly and plan for both things, I feel like it kind of has to fall into place, because again, you have that timeline, there's a deadline, so it's just pre-planning, have hopefully there is an onboarding plan already in place, and just kind of move those timelines a little faster if you need to. I think that's my main piece of advice.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was going to say, have a plan, is step one. And I think you're right that managers shouldn't be afraid to talk about this, because they're usually so nervous about saying the wrong thing or addressing the fact that there is a child that's about to come. Well, you should be talking about it a lot, and you should be talking about the implication of that on work, and be comfortable pushing out deadlines or bringing them forward. And I think that where we see the biggest issues is when managers kind of ignore that it's happening and think like, oh yeah, just do this onboarding plan and we'll figure it out. And no, like it is actually really difficult to onboard and make a coverage plan at the exact same time. And the best thing we can all do collectively is to talk about it and support that person in building out a plan and be realistic about it. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I know we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, but it is something that I think is so different from generations past, where, in our parents' generation, you would go to a company and you would stay there forever. And so this idea of switching jobs while pregnant or expecting a child didn't happen like it's happening today. And now it's become just this really prevalent thing that is happening, that is becoming very quickly normalized, and yet people are really afraid of it. So it was really fun to talk through it with you. Last plug I will say is for those of you who are interviewing while expecting, looking to switch to a new company, check out our tenure database. We have crowdsourced over 250 tenure policies, so we can show you what companies require in terms of your employment time before you qualify for paid parental leave. And if your company does not provide paid parental leave before 12 months, you can use that database and share it with them and try and convince them to lower their work requirements for paid parental leave. All right. Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The False Tradeoff. Make sure to subscribe if you like what you heard, and give us a follow on LinkedIn to continue the conversation on all things working parenthood and parental leave. Is there a topic you'd love us to cover in a future episode? Drop us an email at hello@parentaly.com. And if you're looking for support on preparing for parental leave, head over to www.parentaly.com. We have checklists, guides, and other free resources to help you make the experience a little bit easier. That's PARENTALY.com.